507 AD, the king of the Franks, Clovis, defeated the Visigoths in Gaul, and by so doing showed his fellow Catholics under Visigoth yoke it was their liberation. His troops were not allowed to raid. This was no foreign invasion. His aim was to tame barbarian Gaul and found the Merovingian dynasty, and he hoped to invoke the aid of the Pope when he converted, didn't he? So his baptism on Christmas Day, thanks to his wife's persistence, made her a saint, you see, him a pal of the papacy, and kept the Vandals at a distance. In 529, Saint Benedict founded a monastery. He wrote the rule how monks should live, obediently and honestly. 8 hours of work, 8 hours of sleep, the rest to prayer or charity, and enshrined it in his masterwork for posterity and clarity. The Benedictine pray and work enlightened monkish mystery and helped Europe to emerge from that dark night of history, when Rome did fall and one and all plunged into the dark ages, although this term's now a negative word, misleading and outrageous. Justinian, Byzantine emperor, in 542 AD, crushed a riot which had run amok that he did not foresee. He'd increased taxes and arrested fractious yobs after a chariot race, who'd committed murder, and he preferred to imprison them. "That's a disgrace," shouted rioters who wanted to see them made an example and executed, and were annoyed that he had toyed with their sentence and commuted it to imprisonment. It was difficult. He was impotent to stop the mayhem and the melee that was now running amok. 30,000 rebels were quashed. It was actually his wife, the Empress Theodora, who, refusing to flee, urged they fight before the council and denounced the insurrection, while Justinian was running in the other direction. For the 6th century was a time when history was written by the victors and by men, and queens and empresses never got a mention except as a figurehead or means of intercession, a provider of heirs or patroness of the arts. So Theodore was exceptional, political, had the smarts to run the empire by herself, provide abracadabra. We haven't seen a shrewder woman since Cleopatra. She was skilled in government and military ventures, despite her checkered history and misadventures. In her youth, on stage, to everyone's surprise, she'd performed with a goose who picked corn from her thighs. But that aside, we should be gratified that she catalyzed Justinian to action, and praise the women of influential position who've had the mettle to settle an infraction. Against all adversity, the historical perfidy, making history her story. So they both assertively did a top job of quashing the mob. But a decade later, plague raged, claiming 25 million. The city was struck by Black Death, the plague of Justinian. For so it was named, and certain blamed him, underscoring his demonic empire, exporting supplies punishment for his sins. And in a way, it was plain these complaints weren't made in vain, for with golden slaves and quinces, Justinian exported plague, decimating empires Byzantine and Sasanian as it spread from port to port to port around the Mediterranean. As if in reply, 2 monks arrived in 553 AD. With hollow canes, they followed the way of the Black and Caspian seas. For they were undercover and had walked the length and breadth of China to find a secret punishable by death, how to breed and spin the fragile thin silkworm's silk so subtle a ray of light could damage it. And so these monkish smugglers kept the silkworm eggs or larvae instead in darkened bamboo canes. With mulberry bush to munch on, Justinian took pains to establish a new monopoly for silk in his regal circle, for only the elite of Byzantium could wear this imperial purple. In 570, the Middle East would promise Muhammad's birth in Mecca. Islam was upon us. According to Islamic doctrine, the Holy Quran posits the monotheistic teachings of Moses and the prophets. Muhammad was requested to recite verses by Gabriel, and by 632 he had converted the whole of Saudi Arabia to Islam. It was his plan to fast the month of Ramadan and to pray 5 times a day while facing Masjid al-Haram, and at least once within your life to make a holy trekker, pilgrimage or Hajj they say, to the holy Mecca. From Middle East to Far East, and Chinese Emperor Wendi shaped a dynasty from civil divisions. Finally, in the end, he decided to reunite after fighting for 3 centuries. China had been fractured by the enmity of enemies. By uniting North and South in his magnanimity, they claim he laid the foundations of the Tang dynasty, and decided that China had earned and deserved the longest canal system still in the world. But just a clarification for researchers, his name is unrelated to Wendy's Burgers. Meanwhile, and just next door, a devotee of Buddhism, Shotoku, gave up meat and redesigned the food system. He ruled in lieu of his aunt, effectively Prince Regent, and wrote down principles with which Japan was in agreement. Perhaps it's a shock to you that Prince Regent Shotoku became such a legendary name, but his face graced currencies. He gave his name to universities, which helped in cementing his fame. So with Clovis, Justinian, Muhammad and St. Benedict, we race through the 6th century, and Shotoku brings an end to it.